With who here has seen The Sound of Freedom, or at least heard about it? Okay, that movie is gaining a lot of ground, and for good reason. Most people probably know, if you research it all, that movie's, you know, it's 5 years old and was just released because Disney held it and didn't want it released. I think it has something to do with, you know, Disney's proclivities. But
God's timing is perfect.
it is. It is. His timing is always perfect. And folks need to wake up to what's going on. Sexploitation, as I call it, is at an epidemic level. As we are seeing, and I've seen the numbers, that sex trafficking and the sex trade looks like may outdo the drug trade here this year, as far as the amount of income coming in. Because as they have said, you know, you can sell a bag of dope one time, but you can sell a young lady or a young man 4 or 5 times a day or more. And that has to stop. It's time folks stopped being sunshine patriots and start getting involved. And that's why our guest is here today, is because she is someone who got involved, and someone that needs to be encouraged and applauded, and we need to make a difference right here. Rosie Garbe is co-founder of Scarlet Road, right here out of the Bremerton area. They have a website and good ways for you to be able to look up some information, and they are doing wonderful work helping people escape that lifestyle. So would you please join me with a warm welcome for Rosie Garbe.
Thank you guys so much. So I wanted to share a little bit today about, as I said, what exploitation actually looks like here in Kitsap County, and what Scarlet Road is doing right now about the issue. So a little bit of background on myself and about the organization. Scarlet Road started in 2008, and our purpose is to be a direct service organization. So that means that really everything that we're doing is to serve individuals as they're exiting sexual exploitation here in our community. And so how I ended up getting involved in this is kind of crazy. I would not have told you 20 years ago that this would be my life path. But as I started to learn more about trafficking and sexual exploitation, I felt myself intrinsically connected to this issue. And in 2007 and 8, as we were starting to get going, there were several women and I who started to ask some really hard questions about our community. What does sexual exploitation look like in our community? Is there human trafficking? All 3 of us had experiences and connections within the sex industry or sexual exploitation in some capacity. Several of us were social workers. There was a survivor as well involved. And our hearts were really with what resources are in the community to serve this population. What does it actually look like? And the only way we could do that was by asking questions and to really listen. And so that's really how we got started, was just by listening and asking and listening and asking and listening. And we got to a point after a lot of that where we determined that a lot of survivors were falling through the gaps. And it wasn't because we don't have fantastic services in Kitsap County, we do, but they weren't tailored to this population or to the trauma that this population experiences. And so it was really, we felt that we couldn't turn away any longer, and that we really needed to make some serious impact for survivors. And so everything that we've done since has really been to empower survivors to take control back in their life. And control is something that you're going to hear me talk a lot about tonight. I know that we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to move quickly tonight, but there will be some times for questions afterwards. So hold your questions, sit on them, and I'll come back for sure. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was what does exploitation actually look like in Kitsap County? So we know from our client support and our client disclosures that we have had just this year over 120 disclosures of abuse of sexual exploitation happening in our community. And you'll hear me use the language of sexual exploitation and not human trafficking, because human trafficking is a legal term. However, sexual exploitation can often be very difficult to prosecute because it's nuanced and it's manipulative and it's coercive. And when you try to take some of that into a court of law, it can be very, very hard to prove. So we have our legal definition of human trafficking, and then we have sexual exploitation. And human trafficking always involves sexual exploitation. Sexual exploitation sometimes doesn't always involve human trafficking. So that's why you're going to hear me use these two different terminology, sometimes in the same way, sometimes not. So, over 120 victims this year, and 20% of them have been males, which I think is a really shocking, right? Most of the time when we think about human trafficking or sexual exploitation, it's young teenage girls, right? But the reality is we actually see a lot of males, even in our community, who are exploited through the sex industry. In Kitsap County, the average age of entry into exploitation is approximately 15 years old, based on what our clients have disclosed. Now, Kitsap County does not have an overarching data collection body when it comes to exploitation or trafficking. It's actually one of our goals for the Human Trafficking Task Force for Kitsap County, but it's really complex. So all of the statistics I'm going to give you tonight is straight up coming from our clients. And I think it's important to note when I say that we're a very small agency. And I think we're just sort of scratching the surface. We don't have a lot of capacity to be everywhere. And we don't have a ton of staff. So take my numbers with a grain of salt, because I think that they're definitely not everybody in our community. So 15 years old is kind of what we're seeing the average age of entry in. And we're seeing two dominant types of exploitation entry. The first is through intimate partnership relationship. So this is commonly referred to as boyfriend pimping. You guys may have heard that terminology before. Basically, it's a pimp who is then coming alongside a vulnerable individual and manipulating them into an exploitation lifestyle and controlling them through that lifestyle. The other most common form that we're seeing, and we have seen this happen in such a huge percentage of our clients, is familial pimping. When a family member is selling their child, their niece, their nephew, their sibling for a resource or for money. And I think that brings us to an interesting point, that it's often a myth that when we're talking about sexual exploitation and human trafficking, that it is always in exchange for money. It's actually not always in exchange for money, so much so that Washington State changed our definition of human trafficking to include any resource, any exchange, whether that's monetary, drugs, food, shelter. It could be any type of resource. So file that away also as you start thinking about, as we go a little bit deeper in, because it starts to get really complex when you think about exchanges of resources, manipulation, and coercion, right? All right, so we see intimate partner relationships and we see familial in Kitsap County. So let's talk a little bit about the intimate partnership relationship of exploitation, which is what we see the most often. And I think that I bring this up because there's a lot of myths around human trafficking being a kidnapping situation. right? And physically locked down. In most cases, with our participants, they could potentially walk out the door very often. But there is so many other things happening beneath the surface for them that walking out the door is next to impossible and sometimes the hardest thing that they've ever had to do. And so let's talk about some of those things. If you're 15 years old, you get involved in a relationship that you believe that somebody cares about you, and that person slowly begins to isolate you from your support system. Now, you may already have other vulnerabilities in your life. Poverty may be a vulnerability, or there may be abuse in your home, or there may be just simply a distance between you and your caregivers or your family, right? That could be simply because you're a teenager and you're rebellious and you're flexing those independent skills, right? Which is a good thing, but also can be really easy to take advantage of. Or you could just be coming from a home where parents are distracted or not as available, right? Because of the life that we're living. So there's a lot of different reasons why somebody may be vulnerable. But you go into a relationship with an intimate partner who claims to have your best interest at heart, right? If you think about it in a traditional boyfriend setting or girlfriend setting, you're trusting that person. You believe that person cares for you. You believe that that person has your best interest, right? But if they're manipulating you into a way where they are going to be able to get something out of you right from the start, that relationship is always tainted. And that is the foundation when we're talking about sexual exploitation. There is always intent behind a pimp. They don't just fall into it. There's intent. There's intent to recruit, and there's intent to manipulate and coerce every step of the way to get an individual into a situation where they don't know how to say no, or they feel like they have to say yes or do an activity because they either owe this person something, or they feel like, again, this person loves them, and so if this person's asking me to do this thing, like have sex with another person, then it's probably okay, right? Like, maybe I feel a little conflicted about it, but he really cares about me. She really cares about me, so I trust him. He knows what's best for me, right? If you think about a 15-year-old brain, right? Not from an adult brain, but from a 15-year-old brain or a 19-year-old brain, even a 19-year-old brain. I don't know if you guys remember what it felt like to be 19. Right? Yeah. Steve chuckles. It's hard. Being young is hard. You're learning. So, isolation is a huge piece of this manipulation. It is the first piece because when you are pulled away from your support system and your community, then you no longer have a sounding board. The only sounding board that you have is the person who's abusing you. And that's a really dangerous place to sit. Yes, I'm so sorry. My computer just shut off on me again, and all my notes are on here. Okay, got it. All right, so isolation and grooming kind of go hand in hand. Grooming piece is that love and affection. It's the piece that keeps you going back because you're getting something out of it. You might be getting a connection with another person. You might be getting your basic needs met. If you're experiencing poverty or abuse in your home, what are those big needs that come out of your vulnerability? So you might not have enough food on the table at home. As a 15-year-old kid, if somebody is providing that for you, you're starting to bond with that person who's providing for those needs. If you are not in a home where you're experiencing genuine love and care, and you start experiencing that from another person, you are starting to bond with that person because that's a need that we have. So that is a part of the grooming process. And as the grooming is happening, there is a slow pull away from your community of support. Okay, so now we've got intent to target, from a recruiting perspective, a pimp knows what he's doing right from the beginning. We've got this grooming of slow connection happening where trust is being built and you are being slowly pulled away from your support system. And then you've got this manipulation happening. Gosh, we're really getting low on money. How about you just sleep with my friend? It's not a big deal. But we get like $150 and we can go to the grocery store and we get the food that we need, right? And there's this like kind of conflict that starts happening. There's a need that your provider is then supposed to be filling, but he's saying that he can't fill. And he's asking you to be a part of the solution. And you're feeling guilty if you say no, because he's provided all these other things for you, right? So then you're like, what do I do? Should I do it? Should I not do it? At 15 years old, I should just do it. It's not that big a deal. It's a huge deal. The first time that a person gets turned out in the sex industry is a life-altering experience for them. There is a wealth of shame that happens in their mind and in their bodies, and that experience completely shifts their whole perspective. And to make it more complex, if you don't have anybody that you trust to talk to anymore because you've been isolated from your community, you don't know who to go to, and you don't feel like you have anybody to go to. And you're really sort of emotionally stuck. And that compounds, because then the next night you have to deal with it, and the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and it's not just one person a night, it's 5 people a night, or 6 people a night, or 7 people a night. It's every single day, over and over and over and over and over again. And you start to live in survival mode. Because your body and your mind is experiencing such a high level of trauma that you don't know what is up and you don't know what is down and you don't know how to walk away from that situation. Now, so we're all in this like heightened emotional experience, right, from this little story that I'm telling you. Take a step back and think about how much more complex it is with all of those emotions happening to think about the fact that you no longer have a place to live. You probably never had a real job in your life, so you have no work history. You don't have any credit history. You may have never learned how to pay bills. You don't potentially even have a high school diploma. You might, you may not. Your barriers are starting to get really high. And when you think about walking out that door and trying to make it on your own, it's impossible. And it's the scariest thing you ever have to think about. And that, in that moment, is often where Scarlet Road meets our clients. And it is the most critical time in their life. Decision making for them is exhausting because they are making a million decisions at one time. And just staying alive and afloat is like an every hour reality for them. So, let's talk a little bit about how Scarlet Road approaches that. Now that you have a better understanding of what that experience for many of our clients looks like. So we believe in sort of a 3-pronged model for support and intervention. If we can work ourselves out of a job, we're doing our best work. So we believe that prevention is critical. But much of the prevention work that we do also ends up being intervention work, and I'll explain why. So a ton of our prevention work is within our schools. We know that if kids are getting involved in this at 15 years old, they need to know about it before that. And they also need to know how to get help at that age, right? So we teach a 2-day classroom curriculum in our schools throughout Kitsap County to provide information about exploitation, but also just about healthy relationships, boundaries. How do you know if somebody's trying to manipulate you or not? So things like that. And out of that curriculum, we almost always get disclosures of exploitation or sexual abuse. Every single classroom that we teach. So we know it's working, but it's also really, really hard because these are people's lives are really being violated. Our outreach team does a phenomenal job facilitating this curriculum. They also facilitate outreach activities in youth organizations. For example, we go to Coffee or Drop-In Center once a month. We work with our juvenile detention centers. And really anywhere that will invite us into this space, we want to be a part of, as long as we have capacity. So that is a piece of what our prevention looks like. So we do a lot of youth prevention. We also do a lot of prevention work and education work within our local community of service providers. So we know that oftentimes it's not necessarily going to be us that is the first connection with a survivor who maybe is getting out or looking for help. They may be going to go get a free meal at the Salvation Army, or they may be going to look for rental assistance because they're trying to figure it out on their own and they didn't know that we existed, right? So we want to make sure that our community of providers know how to identify and support survivors. So we spend a lot of time providing training and education to our providers as well, and then general community as well, because we know that often it's a friend or a family member that somebody reaches out to. And sometimes that's the most powerful way for them to get help. Hey, I know that there's this organization that can help you. Let's try to get you connected with them, right? And that can be huge. We get a lot of referrals from friends and families as well. So we do prevention. Let's work ourselves out of a job, but let's also make an impact for people who are actively experiencing exploitation. The next piece is reach. Because this is not a population that is actively asking for help or self-identifying, we want to make it as easy for them as possible to understand what's happened to them and to ask for help. This is a really hard topic to ask for help around. So if we can make it super, super simple and really fast to get help, then we're doing our best work. So our outreach team has a hotline that you can call that's manned 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and you will get a call back usually on that day, if not that hour, when you call, if it isn't picked up immediately. We also have a drop-in center that's available just for walk-ins. It's open 2 days a week. People just show up at our office and just ask for help, which is huge. Because sometimes just getting into the door, you don't know that you're going to do that 30 minutes before you do it. So we want to be as available as we can for people. We also believe that in our outreach arm, because safety is a huge and complex thing for people, their abuser may be pursuing them, they may be connected to organized crime, there may be drug abuse involved, right? There may be a lot of different barriers that an individual is working through in that moment when they choose to leave. That we want to be able to create a really streamlined process for them that's not complicated for the participant or for the client. So that means we get to do all the hard work. So it's a big piece of a crisis intervention, making sure we can get people safe place to sleep, food to eat, and if they need safety involving law enforcement or protection orders or any of that, we do all the hard work for them and they just have to show up and participate, and that's all. So that sort of gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're doing in our prevention and then our outreach arms. Basically, we want to be here for people in those spaces. The next arm is a little bit different. We know that when we're talking about exploitation, recovery is a very long process, and that it involves a lot of different elements, physical elements and socio-emotional elements. There's a ton of trauma that has to be processed before somebody is really in a place where they can stably manage their life. And so when we have an individual who's come through our outreach program and they're really able to vocalize and say, I want help, I'm really willing to put the work in towards changing my life. And everything in our program is consent-based. You have to want it, you have to work hard for it, because we can't do it for you. And so every piece of what we have created is to bring control and choice back in for that client, where all of that has been stripped away from them. So when they're ready to say, yeah, I'm really ready to dig in, and I'm ready to work hard for this, that is when we will transition them from our outreach program to our aftercare program. And aftercare is an intensive case management. We have employment support services, education support services, housing support services, group therapeutic connections. We have individual therapy resources for individuals, equine and animal-assisted therapy resources. Oh gosh, the list goes on and on. But really, all of those physical needs that they need to reduce the barriers for them to be able to start living their own life well, and access to emotional support services and community where they can start to heal. And the combination of those two things working together, not necessarily in a linear fashion, but really at the pace of an individual, when they are ready to take those steps and in their own process, then we work with them to be able to remove those barriers. And every client that we work with, every participant that comes through our program is coming in with their own experiences, their own barriers, and their own strengths, which I think is really important to remember. Survivors have incredible strengths that have kept them alive through a vast amount of trauma. And so we don't want to forget that they have what they need inside of them to accomplish incredible things. And we just get to walk alongside them and support them and encourage them and prepare them sometimes for what's going to happen, or what something might look like, so that they can do it and they can be empowered to be living their own life again. So those are kind of our 3 programs at Scarlet Road. So now that you have a better understanding of what sexual exploitation looks like in our community, a little bit of a better idea of that journey for an individual coming out of it and getting support from Scarlet Road, I want to leave you guys with a couple of opportunities. Scarlet Road exists because our community came behind us and believed that this was valuable and important work to be doing. And so we have to be partnering with our community in every aspect of what we're doing, all of the time. We can't do it without you. We need you to speak up about the realities of this process for an individual as we're coming out of exploitation. We need you to be vocal about the reality that exploitation happens here in Puget County consistently. Every single day, we have people calling our hotline, which means we can't turn a blind eye to it. But it's an ugly topic, and it's one that's hard to talk to people about. So, this brings me to my second challenge for you. Educate yourself. This is a topic that you cannot just go off of my speech tonight, or a single movie, or, right, like, read books, read articles, dig into this topic if this is something that you are feeling drawn to really be vocal about. Really educate yourself. There are so many resources out there about human trafficking and sexual exploitation now, and I'd be happy to share more with you. If you have questions, come and find me afterwards. But there's a plethora of them. We have some of those resources on our website as well. But dig in. right? So that when you go into those hard conversations with people, you can really articulate well why it's important. And why it's so important that our community is supporting survivors. Because without our community supporting survivors, we don't really have anybody. And right now, Scarlet Road is the only agency in Kitsap County supporting this population, which is crazy to me. I feel very ill-equipped to be in that position, but the reality is that we're here. And so we need everybody to come on board with us and really championing for a path for survivors to regain their life, to regain their autonomy. It's so important. Okay, so a couple of last minute realities of ways you can actually make an impact. First and foremost, you can financially give. We are largely funded by our community and individual giving in our community. So if you're drawn to financial gifts, then please consider giving to Scarlet Road or to another entity that is supporting survivors. I'm not going to be greedy, but pick your survivor supporting agency and support it because it's so critical. There's very few of us in Washington State supporting survivors. The other piece is that we need hands. We need your hands. We have so many volunteers that help us do the work that we're doing on so many different ways, so many different levels. So if volunteering is your groove, come and find us and we can talk to you about what might be a good fit for you. We have a whole process for volunteering at Scarlet Road where we want to educate you further and we want to get to know you and build a relationship with you, and we want to really understand how you're going to be a good fit for our organization and how we're going to help you along the way as well. We believe as an organization being a relational organization, which means we want to get to know every single person that we work with, volunteers, staff, and survivors. It will benefit us further if we have that opportunity. So we want to talk to you. Okay, I think I got them all. Yeah. Educate, speak up, financially give, and volunteer. So that's a little bit about Scarlet Road, a little bit about what we're doing here. I'd love to open it up to questions for you guys.
You said you were in the schools. You said you were in the schools, and you had a 2-day curriculum. How are you funding it in the schools? Is it under the, can you hear me?
We're not funded at all by the, so it's completely self-supporting.
Okay, so if we felt strong about what's going on in sexual education in the schools, that would have no impact on what you're doing.
No.
Good.
Yeah. No, we work with each school independently to come in and just support. We are in sometimes health classes, sometimes civics classes. Kind of depends on the school and the teacher. And our hope is that we are just getting a touch point for kids.
And what's your capacity?
For being in the schools or
for
in general?
You said you have about 100 and some odd folks. Do you feel like you have enough capacity to handle Kitsap County?
No. And so a little bit of background, we have over the last 5 years grown every single year to add more staff members because we have not yet met the demand capacity for our services to be able to keep up with. Part of, I think, the challenge with that is that over the last 10 years so we've been around for 15 years now, but really in the last 5 to 10 years in Kitsap County, there has been more and more information about exploitation in our community and more information about, for example, Scarlet Road services being out there. And so I think every time we feel like we're getting on top of the demand for services, the word is getting out there faster than we are. so we keep growing to try to keep up with it, and every year we have served more people, and so I don't know what the cap is because we haven't reached the cap yet, but we keep growing, and hopefully one day we will get there. Yeah.
So are the schools receptive to this, or for the most part, or are they, they're playing the fence?
We are playing the fence, yeah. But I think that the reality is that often the most successful way for us to get into the schools has been directly working with teachers teachers have a lot on their plate right now. It's really complex for teachers. So some districts have been more receptive than others, and we have just really worked to be consistently pushing as hard as reasonable to just get in front of as many students as we possibly can. Because it's really the students that are important. This is why we're doing it. We're here to be in front of the students. And so we'll do it whatever way works. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you find yourself working with, finding the need to report and work with law enforcement frequently?
Absolutely, yes. And as I said before, every client experience varies. However, it's not unusual that it is important or sometimes necessary to involve law enforcement. For two reasons. One, if we're working with a minor, then we're legally required to report to mandated reporters because exploitation is abuse. And so we have to report that as social service providers. And that usually involves law enforcement interaction. However, when it comes to adult survivors, we will not report unless the survivor is consenting of that. So it really has to be their choice. We will encourage them if we feel that it is important, but we won't do it unless they are consenting to that. So every story looks a little different, but we do try to engage law enforcement pretty often because abusers have intent often, and sometimes, here's another complex thing about exploitation. From a survivor's perspective, abuse and manipulation, you may not have been told the full story. And so threats against you may feel very, very severe or maybe perceived as life-threatening. And as a service provider, we don't always know the difference if a threat is actually really dangerous or not. So we just can only go off of what the client is telling us and make the most educated course of action that's going to protect the client and protect everyone else as well. So
You find law enforcement in our county in general, cities in the county, welcoming for you and openly wanting to work with you in this?
yes, in most cases, most of our law enforcement are very welcoming and they want to do something for this. Not every precinct has the capacity to be really proactive on this issue. And so sometimes I think from an outward perspective, it may feel like law enforcement isn't doing a lot for this issue, but the reality is they just have a lot of priorities vying and not a lot of capacity. But every time that we go to a law enforcement agency, we can always get somebody to talk to. And we've also made some really important inroads, not just with our patrol or our detectives, but most of our precincts now have, what are they called? They're called navigators, but they're really a social worker now working for the precinct. So working with the officers as well as the navigators to really make sure that the process of getting help doesn't feel more traumatizing, because sometimes it can. And sometimes our survivors have experienced abuse from law enforcement. Their customers have been law enforcement. It's not unusual. So we've had customers across the board survivors across the board who have had customers from every single walk of life, position, and power, which I know is kind of a hard thing to stomach, but the reality that sexual exploitation exists in our county because there's a demand for it, right? People are buying, and people didn't buy, and it's every level. It's all the way up from politician down to Joe Schmo. So we have survivors that come in who've experienced abuse in from different positions of control. And so sometimes seeking help can be really scary. So we try to make the process really as seamless as possible. Yeah, as possible. Yeah.
So how much of this comes across as organized versus an individual encounter? So as you said, the familial intimacy versus an organized
Organized crimes, yeah. Yeah, I think So I don't have numbers in front of me, but just kind of best guess based on what I know, what I hear from in the office, I would say probably about 20% is organized crime, maybe 25. And it also kind of depends on how you're classifying organized. We have gang-related, that's organized, but it's not always fall, into a traditional organized crime ring. And so we've also got gang connections, so maybe 25%, yeah.
And in regards to the school curriculum, is that a week course, is it a day course?
So we
5
provide
times a year?
it's a two classroom, which we try to do in the same week, with the same kids. So you see them on Tuesday, and then you see them on Thursday, or whatever it is when their class schedule. And it's split into two. We do that intentionally, or we see it Monday and we see it Tuesday. Intentionally because the content in the curriculum is kind of heavy, and kids sometimes need a day to sort of process before they're ready to disclose abuse. And so we found it to be really valuable to be able to come, build some, rapport with them, start talking about hard stuff, give them a breath, a day to sort of take a step back, and then come back and dig in, and then that's when we typically get most of our disclosures is on that second day. Yeah.
So is that in the high schools, middle schools, and did you say you were invited for like a health class, or how are you being invited in? Or-
So we work with mostly teachers, sometimes districts though, but primarily with teachers and often it's health class, but it could also be in a civics class. We've been into other classes as well. But the most natural is in our health class.
And middle schools? Or-
Middle school and high school, yeah. Yeah, our curriculum is not set up for elementary.
How often, you probably know the answer to this, not in grooming process and whatnot with the various clients you unfortunately needed to serve, how often is pornography an element in
So here's the tricky thing about pornography. We now live in a digital world where everything is online. So there's traditional pornography, the way that we sort of think about it, and then there's online pictures, there's online videos. It's not necessarily couched by in the same pornography lane, but essentially it is pornography. So I would say, gosh, you get testing my numbers. I don't actually know the percentage, but I would say probably 75 to 85% have experienced some online connection, if not more. And if you're counting nude pictures have been posted for soliciting exploitation or prostitution, it's probably 100%, right? And those are images and videos that a survivor can never really have full control over. So it is a serious loss of autonomy, and something that potentially can pop up for the rest of their life. So it's very shame-inducing, and it's a really big barrier. The online piece of exploitation is a really, really, really big barrier for individuals. And there's not really a great way for us to mitigate that, or for anybody to really control it. So, yeah.
So when you go into the schools, is there something that the teachers or the school is sending to the parents for an opt-out possibility, or is there something that
I
you're
think that's up to
presenting?
each of the schools. That's not something that we're navigating, so I think it's up to
Okay.
each school and how
So
they,
you don't
probably
know.
also the age level as well differs. So it's not something that we're a part of. Yeah.
Have you ever felt unsafe doing this job, like retaliation because you are on movie or something?
At times, however, I think we have set it up at Scarlet Road to be very, very thoughtful about safety. And so our outreach team, when they're first working with individuals, are assessing safety right from the beginning. We're trying to figure out what risks, what threats are involved, if an abuser is actively pursuing them, all of those nuanced things, just simply by asking what feels like comfortable questions to the participant, and start assessing whether or not it's safe for this individual to stay in the county, whether it's safe for them to be in the housing situation they're in, right? So we start navigating all of that right from the beginning. And because we do that right from the beginning, it really helps us to establish what is going to be the best safety plan for this person and their specific situation. And we've never had a threat or an outward attack from an abuser. And I think it's because we are very methodical about it. And we're also really intentional about bringing in law enforcement if we need to, if there really is a serious threat, right? So we've never had a critical issue, but I think that there is, always some potential, right? Because as you said, we are taking, let me rephrase that. We aren't taking away anybody's income, right? Because everything that we're doing at Scarlet Road is consent-based. However, it can feel like, to a pimp, that we're supporting, something that they don't want for this individual. And it can feel like we're taking away their income. The reality for most pimps, most abusers, they have 5, 6, 10 girls or boys that they're working, and they lose one. It's a loss. It's probably not worth the effort. Which is also, like, if you really think about it, how sad, right, that situation is. Or there's another one they can recruit.
Do you have any kind of idea how many of these victims have come from like single parent homes or broken homes?
I don't have statistics on that. I mean, I think that we always see that the higher the vulnerability level for somebody getting into exploitation, the more likely they are to be exploited. So any marginalized population, any poverty, any abuse, any brokenness in their, or dysfunction in their home unit, where the safe space should be, that's, creates a crack in a vulnerability. But I don't have statistics on that. Any other questions, you guys? Great questions. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Grab some information or ask more questions. Pam, my lovely development director back there, and myself will be here for a while.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosie, for joining us tonight. This is an issue that we really need to be more than sunshine patriots when it comes to helping in this area. If we can't make a difference here at home, forget the national stuff and all the rest of it, and all the controversy around, the islands and Epstein and all this stuff. I mean, all of, it's all real. Epstein didn't hang himself, by the way. Oh, but here locally, we have a lot of hurting people. And for those of you that are fathers and others, as a predator was asked very frankly, what can I do to protect my daughter from people like you? Or in some cases, the son, etc., right? Because it's guys too, that's a high number, 20%. What can I do? And he said, number one, you make sure you tell your daughter or your son that you love them. Because if you don't, somebody else will, and they'll believe them. Talking, communication, it is so critical. The idea of listening, I shouldn't say talking, but listening, asking and listening. That's something I picked up, and it is important. I personally was a victim of sexual abuse at age 5 and 7 from outside sources, and it was devastating to not have my parents believe me at the time. Wow. They care more about this than they, and during that time frame, I mean, we're talking in the 60s, some of it I believe was just like, this can't be real. Something that couldn't happen. That doesn't happen. Well, it does. And I got hit on in high school. I got hit on by one of our wrestling coaches. It happens. One of the issues that I have seen, and the reason I asked the question about pornography, is because it seems like socially acceptable amongst so many people. And we need to get to the point that when someone brings up what they've seen or what they've watched, we need to shame them. A story came to mind that was given to me about George Washington, that they had a dinner party with quite a few folks in attendance. The ladies excused themselves after dinner so that the men could have their cigars, etc. And after the ladies excused themselves, one of the gentlemen, if you will, at the table started to tell a very off-color sexual joke. And as I heard it, at one point, as it just got started, our first president, George Washington, slammed the table and said, "Sir, there are gentlemen in the room." And that ended it. And it's time we started showing and acting as though that sort of activity is not acceptable, because people will put up with it. We walked in years ago, my wife and I, we walked in where a family with their children and I believe some grandchildren, they're all watching pornography together. It is far more prevalent than you would imagine. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I have been very blessed with a family and my daughters that have been pretty well protected. They've got their heads screwed on straight. But that doesn't end the threat for them or for those around them. So I can't encourage you enough to right here at home support Scarlet Road and look into whatever in volunteering in whatever way that you can. I understand do you have a volunteers class or a mentors class, something like that?
Yeah, we have a volunteer orientation. The next one is not until October 7th.
October.
Skip over the summer and the day for people, but October 7th. Yeah, so if you're interested in volunteering, you can go on our website and you can sign up for that class. It's a full day, 8 hours or 7 hours of training.
Sign us up. So we'll get there.
So what is the website?
ScarletRoad.org. There's content with our website up there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just checked it out. It's up and going. Very nicely done website, and again, something that I truly hope, and I know you'll take it in the spirit intended, I truly hope to work you out a job so that there's no need for Scarlet Road anymore. Unfortunately, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun, and one of the oldest professions out there, we have evil that does exist. There is a God that is real, but there is a rebellion out there in the hearts of many, and it can lead them into these traps. So again, get involved in any way that you can. It's very, very important. Okay, do we have anything for the good of the order?